Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Alumni Series What It Takes talk. This talk is titled What It Takes to Avoid Burnout, Sustainable Energy for Work and Life. And this is the second of our summer What It Takes alumni speaker events of the year, which is specifically aimed at alumni graduates graduating in 2021 or earlier. So maybe in the chat you can say who's graduated in which year, connect with people from your year. I know that's been happening a little bit already. That'd be nice to do. This established award-winning series is usually targeted at current Westminster students and recent graduates during term time. But we're pleased to deliver this event for alumni who may be at a more advanced stages of their career journeys and may have been out in the world of work for a few years. So hopefully, Kate just put in there. So Kate's our talker. She graduated in 20. Was that? I missed that, Kate. Remember that? You graduated. Let me just introduce myself. My name is Justin Haroon, and I'm a lecturer at the University of Westminster. I work in the School of Life Sciences, and I run a load of modules there on things like health and well-being and resilience, and I teach and the health pathway primarily, but a little bit of science too. And I also run something called the Centre for Resilience. So Kate helped found the centre with me and another colleague called David Peters over 11 years ago now, I think. So quite some time ago. And that centre is still going, and part of the work of that centre was to work in the field of healthcare and in the field of industry to help avoid burnout, help give people the tools to avoid burnout. So the talk today is going to be based on a lot of theory, but also practical, real world scenarios that Kate has been in as a consultant and as a coach. So that's going to be quite interesting. And just a little bit more about the centre. So the centre now has grown a little bit. So we have 3 research groups within the centre. We have a pathology section, an aging biology research group, and a community health and wellbeing research group doing all sorts of interesting work, ranging from the impact of free school meals to marine life biology, through to elite athletes, cycling, resilience in their cardiovascular systems, and all sorts of interesting stuff. So anyway, that's me. So I'm going to, before I introduce our speaker, do a little bit of housekeeping. So you may have noticed that this talk has been recorded. It will be edited and made available on our YouTube channel when it's ready, and we're going to send you the link. So your cameras and your microphones will automatically be turned off, so you won't be able to do that. But the chat function is live. So there is a live group chat that's on, and the Q&A chat is on too. Please use the Q&A chat to ask Kate questions. We have colleagues in the background working incredibly hard and making our life incredibly easy. They're moderating the event, and they're going to collate your questions throughout the talk and put these together in a kind of collated form so that we can ask Kate at the end of her presentation to answer those questions. So I'll be asking Kate those questions. Also, please use the general group chat for anything else, any issues you have, any trouble you have. Just someone will look after you in the group chat. It may not be me, but someone will look after you, one of the moderators. And moving on to introduce our speaker, I'm really delighted to introduce our alumni speaker for today's talk, Kate Fismer, who's a colleague and a friend, and as I said, helped to set up the Centre for Resilience with me and David Peters. And she will share her top tips on how to avoid burnout at work and in general life. Kate graduated from Westminster in 2013, quite a while ago, hey Kate, with a BSc in Health Sciences and Naturopathy, and is now a naturopathic physician with over a decade of experience She is the founder and director of Revolution Resilience, which is a consultancy supporting sustainable well-being and performance. Kate works with individuals, teams, and organizations, helping them to find sustainable strategies for well-being and resilience. She was also a founding member of the Westminster Centre for Resilience, as I've said, and she has published in peer-reviewed journals, including one of the most cited papers I've ever seen, a systematic review on sleep, back in the day when systematic reviews were just breaking into the field. So she was one of the first ones to really go for that, which is great. Groundbreaking in her research. During this talk, Kate will share science-backed insights and practical strategies to prevent burnout, protect your energy, set boundaries, and build sustainable habits for long-term well-being and effectiveness. So I'm going to now pass over to Kate, then I'll come back online for the Q&A section. So Kate's going to do the presentation. Please do remember to put any questions you have in the Q&A chat throughout Kate's presentation. Any issues you have, also use the chat as well. And over to you, Kate.
Brilliant. Thanks for the wonderful introduction, Justin. And it's very lovely to see you. And I don't know if you've seen, but you're getting some appreciation in the chat already.
Oh, that's amazing. I've just seen that. Thank you so much.
He was also one of my lecturers as well, and I agree. So a large reason of why I'm here today is definitely because of Justin. So thank you. And because of the University of Westminster. So it is very, very wonderful to be joining you. And I'm absolutely delighted to have been invited to share some of these insights with you tonight. So I'm going to share my slides. And as I'm sharing my slides, I've got a question to ask you. What is something that you know helps you recharge? So I'm going to be talking today and sharing things with you, but I'm also going to be inviting you to share some things in the chat box, share some of your insights, and those sorts of things, because actually it can be really useful for other people to see, because we all do learn from each other. So I really do invite you to share some of your experiences and thoughts in the chat box. And I'd love to hear, as I said, what might be something that you know already actually supports your recovery? What recharges you? Sorry, I'm just getting on. There we go. So what's something that you know supports your recovery? I'm actually just having a look for the chat box now as well. Bear with me for a second. There we go.
Have you got it? Okay, great.
Yeah, got it. There we go, fabulous. Going to the cinema, meditation, time with friends, holidays, getting inside to nature, walking, cycling, lots of sleep. I'm with you about the sleep as well. So that's fabulous. So you already have a good awareness of some of the things that you know that you can go to as things to support your resilience or things to recharge you. And that's actually really, really important. So some of the things that we're going to be talking about today might be new things for you, but it's also really important to remember the things that work for you. Because we know that when we start to feel stressed, when we start to feel overwhelmed, when we start to feel a bit burnt out, that's actually when we start to forget some of those things, myself included. And this is my job, and I've been doing it for very many years. So why is resilience and wellbeing even important? Why is it becoming so more important? And lots of data is showing these days that actually people are starting to feel more stressed, that people's mental health is maybe not as good as it has been in the past, that actually people are tending to work for longer. So we're working longer days, and that we might even be working more days per week. So we might even be working over the weekend. And also some of the research suggests that actually we spend quite a lot of time thinking about work and worrying about work as well. So give me a thumbs up if any of that is familiar and resonating with you. The positive thing about all of this is there is actually research that shows that when we learn strategies and skills that support us, that they can actually help. I really want to caveat that first of all by saying that nothing is a magic bullet. If I could wave a magic wand and ensure that none of us ever experience burnout or, exhaustion or any of those sorts of things, then I would. But it's a possibility that these things can happen. So perhaps the opportunity is to start to think about what are some of the things that we can put in place. We can't change everything, but could it be useful to start to learn even some small steps or some techniques that can provide us with some support? This is something that we talk about with our clients when we're working with the NHS, and they are certainly one of the largest organisations that are experiencing high levels of burnout. We can't change the NHS, but we can start to help people learn some strategies to support themselves. So what is burnout? There are a huge amount of definitions of burnout. So just to give us a working definition for tonight, the burnout that we're talking about relates to work, but it can have an impact on the rest of our life. And very specifically, what we're talking about is a depletion of our energetic resources. What I mean by that is literally our physiological resources. So a simple way of saying that could be how much charge we have in our battery. And we know the sorts of things that can affect our battery are things like feeling tired physically, feeling tired mentally, and feeling tired emotionally. So those are the sorts of things that we see when we see burnout, or even when we're starting to approach burnout. And I can see people say that we can start to get ill, absolutely right. And often, yeah, many people have found that they've become more stressed, the world is more complex, particularly since things like the pandemic. All is not lost, though. As I said, we can't magic there to be no stress or magic the world to be stress-free, but we can do some simple things to look after our energy if we bring that awareness. So what I'm talking about here is actually resilience, and this is a definition of resilience that we use, and it's, as you can see in the middle of the slide, there is a word in green called recover. So that's one of the key things that we're going to be talking about tonight and looking at, is really how important recovery is. It's such an important thing for helping us to prevent burnout and to adapt to challenge. But also, interestingly, when you look at the work around elite sport and performance, recovery is also something that's understood to be really important for high performance. So when we talk about recovery, we are literally talking about physiological recovery, because we're not built to have a battery that just continues and continues and continues. We're not built to be a Duracell bunny. So we absolutely have to recharge our battery. So we're really talking about that physiological recharge. So a lot of it is starting to understand what are some of the things that we can do to take control and start to reduce some of the things that might be draining our energy, and also what might be some of the things that we can do, which are some of the things that you were already mentioning in the chat box that can actually top up our energy. So things like going to the cinema, things like spending time with our family, things like going out into nature. So all of those brilliant resources that you already shared. So tonight we're going to be doing some reflection, because that's such an important thing. So how do we know if something's working well for us unless we take some time to think about it and reflect on it? How do we know if we need to change something unless we take some time to think about it and reflect on it? We're going to be talking about recovery, as I've already mentioned, and thinking about what some of our own resources are, and also a key thing for resilience, which is our relationships. So that's our relationship to ourselves, but also our people. So there's been an incredible study called the Harvard Happiness Study. If you've heard of it, put a thumbs up in the chat box. And it's a study that looked at people over an 80-year period, so different groups of people. And one of the incredible findings of this study that they found was that close relationships at mid-age, so having two close relationships, in midlife had almost as much impact on people's long-term health and well-being as how much exercise they took and what they ate. So I don't know if that surprises you. I'm interested to hear what you think in the chat box, but people are also so important for our recovery. So for our physiological recovery, but also supporting us in preventing burnout as well. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview of what we call our core survival emotions. The reason this is valuable and useful is because it's something that connects all of us. So every single person on the call tonight, every single person in Westminster University, every single person in the UK, and every person globally shares these same core survival emotions. So we think we've inherited them from our ancestors, and they helped us to do lots of important things. Some of them might be very familiar to you. So many of us tend to have had something called the flight-fight response. So give me a thumbs up if that's something that you've had of that flight-fight response. It's a very active response, and it's a high heart rate, high breathing rate response. So when your flight-fight response is kicked in, you will notice that your heart rate's faster and your breathing rate is faster. And it was to be able to get you to be able to run away from a predator, or if you couldn't do that, to put up a good fight. So that's that flight-fight response. It's very useful if you're walking through London and you step out onto the road and a bus might be coming and you hadn't noticed it, and you very quickly will step back and move out of the way of the bus. So that's your flight-fight response. Now, the really important thing to know about that response, one of the really important things, is that it's very energy intensive. So do you remember we were talking about our physiological resources? This is expensive in terms of our physiological resources, highly useful if we need to get away from a predator, but also expensive. There's another core survival emotion that we have that I call our drive response. It's also known as our feeding and finding response. So the thing about this is it often gets confused with the flight-fight response. It's similar in the sense that it's a high heart rate, high breathing rate response, but it's different in the sense that it's got different hormones associated with it. So that flight-fight response is like your stress hormones, whereas this is more like your feel-good hormones. It's more like your endorphins. So it feels good, it's activated, high heart rate, high breathing rate, but it's still going to use your resources. So it feels good, but it's still going to use some of your physiological resources, which is why we have a response called the recovery response. That's also known as our rest, digest, tend, and befriend response. So this is what you want to come online when you're eating your food, when you sit down for your lunch. It helps all the food that you eat become tiny molecules that get used to make up, like quite literally, you. So that's that rest, digest, tend, befriend response. But it's also a lower heart rate response and a lower breathing response. So much less activation. The final one is something that we call the freeze and fold response. That's that kind of overwhelm response that can happen in the moment, that kind of overwhelm response, or over time, if that starts to build up, then we can see that freeze fold response kick in. That can influence things like burnout and things like depression. So just to show you that, but in a slightly different way, you can see that that top arrow is part of what we call the autonomic nervous system. So the arrow pointing up, that's the activated side, which is the sympathetic. So if you just breathe in for a moment, what you're doing is that you're actually putting your foot on the accelerator. So it's like you're revving the engine a little bit. And when you breathe out, that's like you're putting your foot on the brake. So that's the arrow down. That's slowing our heart rate down, slowing our breathing rate. That's the parasympathetic side of the autonomic nervous system. So just to recap what we were talking about, you could be feeling pretty activated and not so safe, and you could describe that as feeling like you're hunting. Has anybody had that experience before of feeling a bit like you're feeling a bit hunted? Give me a thumbs up if you've had that experience. I know I have. If you're feeling activated, but actually you're feeling quite safe, that could be described as feeling like you're hunting. So it feels quite good, it's high activation, but actually there's different hormones, you're feeling quite good. Still activation, but feeling quite good. So you could say that feels like you're feeling like you're hunting. And just to normalize, this is something that we all feel at times as well. So I'm sure that many of us have experienced all of these different emotions, sometimes within one day, sometimes over longer periods of time. But what we're doing is trying to give ourselves a tool that can help us recognize what we might be feeling in a moment, even what we might have been feeling over a period of time. So if we're thinking that our heart rate is lower, but we're not feeling so great, that's what we could call trapped and collapsed. The other side is if our heart rate's slower and our breathing rate's slower, but we're actually feeling quite safe. So we could call that feeling like we're in the cave, or we could call that like cave time. So in a moment, we could use that as a reflection tool. What we do know is that if we continue to go between feeling like we're hunting and we're in the cave, that actually restores us. So that's regenerating, that's restoring, that's recovering. There's a good balance between energy use and energy restoration. Whereas if we spend more time on that left-hand side of the grid, feeling a bit hunted and a bit trapped and collapsed, over a longer period of time, that may start to impact our health and our well-being. And that's when we can start to see things like that burnout picture creeping up. So just to clarify a quick question that somebody asked about drive, socializing definitely can be part of that. It's interesting, and I'll show you some data later. There's a context to everything. One of the things that I would say is just hold in mind the pub bit. Unfortunately, or fortunately, what we know in terms of the research is if we have alcohol, that will actually affect our recovery. So whilst we might be enjoying connecting with people and friends in the pub, and it might be a really good way to socialize and share some of our troubles or forget about things for a while, when we really, really need physiological recovery, avoiding alcohol can really help us. Other things that also help with recovery is actually exercise, not necessarily too much, but exercise can help us. The fitter we are, sometimes that helps us recover better. So just looking at this, again, how could we use that as a reflection tool, and how might that be useful? So in the moment, it could be useful just to think about, hang on a minute, I'm feeling a bit activated. Where am I right now? Am I feeling hunted? Am I feeling like I'm hunting? Or am I feeling a bit trapped and collapsed? So why might it be useful to understand where we are right now? So it could give us options and it could give us choice. If I know that I'm feeling a bit hunted, maybe that can help me decide what I need to do next. Maybe I need to get up and go for a walk. Maybe I need to go and make a cup of tea. Maybe I need to listen to something, or maybe I need to call a friend. So I was reading a really interesting piece of research this week that said apparently just 8 minutes of speaking to someone that you care about on the phone can help to improve people's mental health and regulate their nervous system. So who's your phone a friend when you need it? But also this can help us understand where we might have been over the last week or over the last month, for example. As I said, we can cope, but if we start to spend months feeling like we're hunted and trapped and collapsed, then maybe that's the time that we need to reach out. Maybe we need to ask somebody for some help. So I can see that somebody's asked about caffeine. It's an interesting one. Certainly caffeine seems to affect different people. So we use heart monitors where we look at people's heart rate and we can see what's happening in terms of their recovery and also their activation. And it's not always that you see that caffeine is having a significant impact for people, but I think often people know when caffeine has quite a big impact for them or not. But also what we know is that when we see something as being stressful, then that tends to influence the way that we feel about it and vice versa. Yeah, please do feel free to put any questions and any any thumbs up if any of this is resonating. So how we feel about a situation will influence how we see it and vice versa. So if I was going to ask you to think about when you notice that that stress response has been triggered for you, what are some of the things that you notice in your thoughts, emotions, or in your body, in your muscles? Feel free to add some of your experiences or your insights into the chat box. So people notice palpitations or their heart rate increasing. Some people notice some crying. Yeah. People notice tension, headaches. Yeah. And what about in the moment? So digestive issues, absolutely. Your hands might get sweatier. Yeah. It can affect also, like, our mouth sometimes feels a bit drier. And why would it be useful to notice these things? So why might it be useful to notice some of the signs of the stress response in our bodies or in our thoughts? Any ideas about that? How could that be helpful for us? Yeah. So it's about understanding what it looks like for us. It's about gathering data. Because when we start to gather data about these things, then we can start to recognize it. First of all, I notice that I've got that tension, or I notice that my thoughts are racing, or I notice that my mouth is dry. And then actually, perhaps that gives us the choice to do something to support ourselves or to regulate our nervous system. As I said, I wish I could wave magic wand, or we could wave magic wands for ourselves, because sometimes there's lots of challenges that we're experiencing, and it's not that this is necessarily a magic bullet, but it's possible that this might help us a bit. So the thing is to understand as well about our brains is that as we tend to get more activated or more stressed over a period of time, what effectively starts to happen in the brain, it's like the smoke alarm part of the brain starts to become more sensitive. So the smoke alarm starts to just kind of go off when things like the toast is being burnt instead of there's an actual fire, if that makes sense. So the smoke alarms can start to become more sensitive and can start to fire that stress response, even if we're not facing so much of a threat, we're just generally feeling more stressed and tense. And absolutely, thanks for picking that up, Justin. I will be talking about self-compassion later. And the thing is about the stress response, it was actually built to help us get out of the way of things like predators or to avoid danger, which is brilliant. It's done a great job. You know, we're all here. So our ancestors have survived, clearly. But it's not always helpful in the context of our very busy and complex lives these days. So that same stress response that gets triggered by lots of the different worries, by conflict with loved ones, by worries about bills and things like that, that's literally the same stress response that was built to help us fight predators. And many of the things that trigger it these days are things that we can't actually physically run away from or physically fight. So things like social media, watching the news, uncertainty. So the question I often ask people when I'm doing talks is, who likes uncertainty? So I invite you to put a thumbs up in the chat box if you enjoy uncertainty. Certainly many of us don't. And for many of us, we can find things like uncertainty very, very activating. So just to normalize that, that's something that many of us experience. And so in terms of things like work burnout, there are lots of different potential things that can contribute to it. So things like, from the research that we know, things like workload, not having a sense of autonomy over our work, feeling a lack of security, feeling pressure, that work-life balance. It's interesting to think about whether we are a work-life integrator or a work-life balancer. So do we separate work and life, or do we integrate work and life? So what are you? Are you a work-life integrator or a work-life balancer? One of the interesting things that can also affect people and increase burnout for some people is actually not necessarily such a negative thing that when we think about it. So being highly engaged and very passionate. So again, that could even be that drive response that we're talking about. We do, even if we're feeling really passionate and highly engaged, still need time to switch off. So people have talked about this a little bit already. Some of the symptoms that we might start to experience if we're experiencing those prolonged feelings of stress. So these are things that we could start to notice if we're progressing on that burnout journey. And again, the invitation is we don't have to do this alone. Often we very much enjoy helping other people. So put a thumbs up if you're somebody that enjoys helping people, if it makes you feel good. But many of us find it difficult to ask people for help. So many of us do find it difficult to ask people for help. And I wonder what it might be like if we started to think that maybe if we did ask somebody for help, we could be giving them that opportunity to feel good, to feel like they're of value, and to feel like they can support. So just inviting us to think or recognize the fact that sometimes us asking for help could be a gift for somebody else. So just to summarize, we have a kind of ancient physiology, or very old, physiology that served us very, very well. And it's still a fabulous thing, but we have a very complex world, as people have said in the chat box, I can see as well. And so the thing is to remember is that we can't just think ourselves out of stress. We can't just think ourselves out of that stress response. We actually need to do something to it. So what can we do? What are the sorts of things that we could do to help ourselves with starting to dial down that stress response? We know in terms of our physiology, we have to start to encourage our physiology down into that cave time, that slower heart rate and slower breathing rate. So we actually have to shift our physiology first before we can start to change our thinking. And then we might be able to move ourselves up into that drive. So we're actually going to do a short practice. I'm going to invite you to join me. And it's a practice that we call Take 5. It's been so interesting over the last year or two to see how much research is starting to come out about really short, we call them micro practices. So the benefit of even building in a practice that might take 20 seconds or less than 5 minutes, and how actually even including 3 of those a day can have a significant benefit to things like our physiology, our well-being, and even helping to prevent things like burnout. So some of this research is also been done with healthcare professionals, so people working in healthcare who have very, very little time. So the practices have to be short so that people can actually make them part of daily life. So it's great to think about actually how we might be able to use this. So I'm going to invite you to hold that thought as we go into the practice. How might you be able to use this beyond this session today? So the first and foremost is just to find a comfortable position in your chair. What I mean by that is having your feet on the floor, if possible, and just making sure that you're in a position in your chair where you can breathe nice and easily, if possible. And this is the kind of practice that you can do with your eyes closed, if that feels more comfortable. you can keep your eyes open. So this is just, again, a chance for you to experiment and see what works for you. Now, I'm going to say also, we're going to be working with our breathing very, very briefly. It might be that you're somebody that's realized that focusing on your breath actually makes you feel a bit uncomfortable. And if that is you, I still invite you to come on the journey with me, but I will be offering you some different suggestions during the practice. So please feel free to ignore the suggestions about focusing on your breath. Okay. So I'm with you, whichever option is best for you. So first, just inviting you to start to bring your awareness. So just bringing your attention to your feet resting on the floor. So just feeling the weight of your feet being held or supported by the floor. And then just starting to bring your awareness to the feeling of the chair supporting you. So you might notice it supporting you under your thighs, under your legs, or supporting your back. So just bringing your awareness to where you notice the chair holding or supporting your body. And if it feels comfortable enough for you, I just invite you to start to bring your awareness to your breathing. And just start to imagine, as you breathe in, the breath coming into the center of your chest. And as you breathe out, your breath coming out of the center of your chest. And as I said, if you're somebody that feels a little activated from focusing on your breath, just invite you to notice the feeling of your hands. So just the weight of your hands, wherever they're resting at this moment. And if you're focusing on your breath, I just invite you to start to follow an even in and even out breath. So that could be in for the count of 3 or 4 and out for the count of 3 or 4. In for the count of 3 or 4 and out for the count of 3 or 4. And if you're not focusing on your breath, just inviting you to bring your attention back to the feeling of your feet being supported by the floor. So your feet resting and being held by the floor. And if you're focusing in your breath, I just invite you to just breathe in, imagining some green coming in as you're breathing in, just imagining some red coming out as you breathe out. And then just a final invitation for all of you is just to take a moment to place your hand, or a hand, sorry, on the center of your chest. And maybe just add a little weight, so just a tiny bit of pressure, or just a little bit of gentle movement. And again, just being curious, just noticing what you notice. And then when you're ready, just letting that go. And just looking around your environment and naming the first 3 colors that you see in the environment around you. So just naming the first 3 colors that you see in the environment around you. So that was a really short practice. Welcome back. Might want to wiggle your toes or wiggle your fingers just to let that practice go. And I'm just curious to hear from people what that was like. So what was that like for you? Was it positive, negative, neutral? So whenever we experiment with these practices or micro practices like this, it might be that we have a positive experience. It might be that we have a negative experience and we think, actually, I'm never going to do that again, which is also data that's also useful, or neutral. So how was that for you? Lots of people tend to notice that actually their brain is still thinking. So according to the research, they think that we might have around 6,000 thoughts a day. Feels like quite a lot. And when we do things like this, it's not that our thoughts will ever switch off. It's almost like we're just giving the brain something else to focus on, just a distraction. So some people saying they found it relaxing, which is great. One of the things that I will be doing as well is after the talk with the follow-up email, I will share a recording of that exercise so that if you did find it useful, you can start to use that. How might people use that? So the first time I noticed the floor supporting my feet, strange. And that's the thing, your feet are always there, your hands are always there, your breath is always there. So if there was a particular part of the exercise that resonated for you more, then how might you be able to use that? We've certainly used it with junior doctors at Guy's NHS Hospital Foundation, and they don't get a lot of time. So they don't get much time to drink water, they don't get much time to go to the loo, they don't get much time to eat. But what they can do is just take a moment, pay attention to their breath while they're washing their hands, feel their feet on the floor, and that could give them a moment to get a little micro moment of recovery. And as I said, it seems like from the research, even 3-5 minutes or less moments of recovery have a benefit, certainly over something like a period of 4 weeks if we practice that regularly. So why did that even work? Or why might something like that even work, like focusing on our feet or changing our breath? We know in terms of how our body works that when we start to slow the breathing down, whichever way, so whether that's through focusing our feet, hands, or actually focusing on our breath, when we slow it down, it starts to slow our heart rate down. So somebody asked about the colours. It's a good question. Really, it's just to give people different resources. So some people will be like, I liked the colours, I'm visual, that really helps me. Some people like the feet more, some people like the breathing more. So it's just to offer a few different things for people to have a chance to see what works best for them. So what we know when we slow the heart rate and the breathing down is actually that starts to send messages up to our brain that we're actually a little bit safer. What we actually start to see is that the prefrontal cortex part of the brain, so that's our kind of executive thinking part of our brain, actually starts to become more in charge when we start to slow our breathing rate and our heart rate. Our kind of thinking, strategizing, connecting part of our brain, creative part of our brain starts to take charge again. And there was a little part of the exercise as well where I invited you to place your hand here just to see what that was like. That might have resonated or not. What's really interesting is there was a study done a couple of years ago where they got people to experience something stressful and they invited them, or there were 3 different groups. One group had a hug after the stressful event. One group put their hand here and one group had nothing. And what they found was that actually putting your hand here for some people had almost the same effect in terms of regulating the nervous system and reducing cortisol as having a hug. So interesting. Or we might have to do sometimes just a little bit of this, and that might give us a moment of recovery. So what are some of the other things that in terms of the research we know have a benefit? And what are some of the simple things that we can do that research shows us can have a benefit? A very, very simple and well-researched practice is giving thanks or having a gratitude practice. So just out of interest, have people heard of a practice called 3 Good Things at all? Anybody heard of the 3 Good Things practice? So what they found in terms of 3 good things is if we spend a few moments each week, or even every day if we have that time, but in terms of the research, it found even just doing it twice a week, spending a few moments thinking about the things that we were grateful for or are grateful for, can have a significant impact on things like helping to prevent burnout and also on well-being. And interestingly, also on things like pain and inflammation. So I'm going to invite everybody to spend a moment just thinking about what's something that you might be feeling grateful for right now. And it could be something really small. So to kick it off, I had my first wild blackberry today. And I'm feeling very grateful for that. That was actually quite exciting. So what might be something that you are feeling grateful for? What's something that you might be feeling grateful for today? Please feel free to share in the chat box. It can be really beneficial for other people to see the things that people are feeling grateful for. And again, if it's something that resonates with you, how might you be able to use it going forward? My bed, somebody put, I agree. There's nothing like also the feeling of getting into fresh bedding. That's always something I will feel grateful for. Somebody saying foraged pomegranates. Gosh, that sounds amazing. I don't know where I'd find pomegranates locally. That sounds fabulous. Finishing work, grateful for life. Really, really special things. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Liverpool's transfer window and the fact that tomorrow is Friday. Absolutely grateful for water. Yep, water and food are quite literally life. So grateful for food and for water. So what we're not talking about here, just to clarify, is toxic positivity. It's not to attempt to make it as if everything's okay, even if it's not. So we know in terms of the research, it's really valuable to name the things that might be causing us stress. Even just the process of naming it or writing it down can give us some space. And at the same time, there are always these little moments that are happening on a day-to-day basis. And if we slow down and give that some time and attention, what we know, as I said, in terms of the research as well, is that that can benefit us over a longer period of time. So when people did a particular study, they did it for 4 weeks, twice a week, but actually the benefit continued for 3 months afterwards. So who could you practice this with, and when could you practice this? Just inviting you to think about that. If it's something that resonates. I've seen Joanna's written going to the local coffee shop, which is brilliant. The people that serve us coffee, it's the village effect. We know that that's beneficial for our health and well-being, as well as potentially the coffee and the antioxidants. Reading as well and doing crosswords. These are all things that help to actually give us something else to focus on that could give us some recovery. So I've got another question for you to think about. And you might want to do this with your eyes closed. You can keep your eyes open, but it's another reflection question. So just thinking about somebody that you care about and they've been experiencing some difficulty, some challenge. Maybe they've made a mistake. Maybe things haven't gone their way. How would you speak to them? So this could just be a self-reflection. You don't have to share anything, but how would you speak to them? So what's the tone of voice that you'd use? What are the kind of words that you'd use? How would you speak to them? And then letting that go and thinking about yourself. So thinking about when you're experiencing difficulty, when you're experiencing a challenge, maybe you've made a mistake, maybe something hasn't gone the way that you'd hoped. How do you speak to yourself? How do you speak to yourself? So what are some of the words that you use or the tone of voice? And when you're ready, again, letting that go. And we're going to do something that is called citizen scientist research. We're going to do some live research. And hopefully you can see that there's a poll. Is the poll coming up for people okay? I'm not sure that it is.
I think it is. Will people need to scan the QR code, Kate?
Yes. So if you, sorry, it's not coming up on my screen, funnily enough, so I couldn't see that you had it.
I can see it.
Oh, fabulous. So if you can use the link and the code or scan the QR code. Do you speak to yourself in the same way that you do somebody that you care about? So do you speak to yourself in the same way that you would somebody that you care about? when you're experiencing difficulty and challenge? Mm, bear with me for a second. Right, just having a look to see if I can see your poll results. So at the moment, the results are suggesting, in line with the research as well, that more people seem to speak to themselves in a way that they wouldn't necessarily speak to a friend or loved one. That doesn't mean everybody does, but just to share that I think around 70% of us, maybe a little bit more, potentially speak to ourselves in a way that we wouldn't speak to somebody that we care about. This might be a little bit higher in this instance. So, what are some of the consequences of that? Well, we know in terms of physiologically, when we speak to ourselves in a very critical way, especially when we're experiencing difficulty and challenge, that can start to really activate that stress response. So this is something called self-compassion. There's a lot of research around it, particularly in the context of things like burnout, but even now in the context of things like leadership and elite performance, which is fascinating. So perhaps, and it's difficult, it's not an easy practice for many of us, but what might it be like sometimes, particularly if we're going through difficulty and challenge, if we started to speak to ourselves in the same way we would somebody that we care about? And if that's tricky, then maybe we can imagine that person, that friend, maybe a mentor, maybe it was a teacher, maybe it was somebody who used to give you positive feedback, even if it was realistic feedback, but you knew that they were always kind in the feedback they were giving you. So maybe you could imagine what they might be saying to you when you're going through that difficulty and challenge. So just to summarize, we've been talking a bit about how we can reduce some of those drainers, maybe the way that we speak to ourselves, maybe making sure that we get time with friends, time in the cinema, some micro practices that could be like this. It could be the breathing. It could be noticing our feet on the floor. It could be some of our gratitude practices as well. Just conscious of time as well. So how are we doing for time now, Justin? Sorry.
I check from the moderators in terms of time, on what time we move to Q&As. We're fine. We've got James said we're fine.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so the other thing that can be a really useful thing to recognize in terms of our cognitive energy is also recognizing that actually we can spend a lot of time and a lot of energy worrying about the things that we have absolutely no control over whatsoever. So I don't know if that's a familiar one for people, if we were starting to think about how much time or how much of our energy might get used worrying or thinking about things that we have no control. But actually, what we know in terms of research that can be really useful is also starting to think about some of the things that we can control. So creating that sense of agency or autonomy for ourselves, starting to think about what might be some of the things, even if they're really small, that I can actually control. So what might be something that you know that you can control? Please feel free to put that in the chat box. What might be some of the things that you know that you can control? Could it be what time you go to sleep? Could it be what music you choose to listen to? Could it be whether you catch up with a friend? So what are some of the important things that you know that actually you can control? Maybe it's even just waiting overnight until you reply to that email, just to see if it seems different the next day. Certainly that's something that lots of people seem to share, is that sometimes you read that email and it feels quite edgy when you read it that night or that afternoon, come back to it the next day, and sometimes it feels like a completely different email or a slightly different email anyway. So just thinking about some of the things that you can control can be useful, especially if we're going through difficulty and challenge, but it's a practice that can be useful anytime as well. And with all of these practices, these are things that we can potentially share with people. So whether that's colleagues, team members, family members, friends, these are all things that we can potentially share with others. So this is just a different way of presenting some of the things that we've talked about. We've talked about that activation system, like that, putting your foot on the accelerator, that high heart rate, and feeling a little bit activated. And we've talked about how recovery is like when we put the brakes on. It's like when we've gone into the cave. It's like when we're resting and digesting. And this is showing what activation looks like when we get people to wear the heart monitors. This is nothing, there's nothing wrong with this individual at the top that you can see. This is just what activation on a normal day in daily life will look like. But as you can imagine, that's going to be draining our battery. So you can see below the difference, a day with some recovery moments, even if it's just making some time to eat lunch away from a desk, just to say, or even making some time to eat breakfast. Somebody mentioned reading earlier, and again, that's a kind of activity. It distracts us, it absorbs us, it gives us a different focus. It can really help with starting to restore or top up our resources physiologically.
Kate, are you presenting slides at the moment?
I am, yes.
Oh,
Is it
no,
not showing?
I don't think we can see them. Sorry, I just thought you were showing, just having a chat. But I think, yeah, the slides
Okay.
are not sharing at the moment. So thanks for raising that in the chat, guys. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, okay, let me try this again. Sorry, that wouldn't have made as much sense when you were looking at that. So just to show you again that this is the can control. So this is what I was talking about when I was talking about,
Nope, still can't see them, I think.
there we go. Is that any better?
No.
That's very strange.
Let me have a look and see. I'll have a look and see if I've got them right, and I'll put them up.
There we go. So I'm just trying that again. So if I, yeah, that's still not showing.
Not that I can see now.
No. Okay.
Just James and the team. Do you have a copy of Kate's slides that you can pop up?
Just going to try that. Okay, let's try this again, just to bide our time. Is that coming up at
There
all?
we go. Yeah, yeah. There
Okay,
we're back.
sorry. Okay, I just had to close it all down and there we go. Okay, excellent. Apologies. So this was what I was showing you, thinking that you were looking at it, but now you can see it, which is what we call the zones of control and influence. So we can often spend a lot of time in this zone, worrying about the things that we have no control and influence over. That doesn't mean that that's not valid. It's perfectly normal, but it's just being aware of that and how much energy that can cost us. So sometimes actually naming it, writing down the things that might be worrying us, but that we have no control and influence over, can actually be really, really helpful. And equally, actually starting to spend some time thinking about the things that we can control, no matter how small, like what we have for supper, like how much water we drink, like the music that we listen to, what we decide to watch. Those are all things that we know in terms of the research. Just focusing on some of the things that we can control can have a benefit in terms of our mental health and our well-being as well. So I was just starting to show you this slide, which was what it looks like a normal day for people. So this is a very typical day for many, many people in terms of activation. So using up our energy. That red, just to remind you, is when we've got our foot on the accelerator. So that's a high heart rate, high breathing rate. So that's what's happening. When you see the red, we're activated. That could be feeling a little bit hunted. That could be feeling like we're hunting, but it's going to be using our resources. When you see the green, that's actually when people are going into that recovery side of the nervous system. So that's the slower heart rate, slower breathing rate. That's like putting the brakes on a bit. That's restoring our physiological resources. So you can see here, as I said, there's nothing wrong with that person. They're wearing a heart monitor. You can see lots of activation. That's just being alive, but they're busy. It's a busy day. And actually you can see below, this is when somebody has made some time to have lunch away from their desk, and actually some time to have breakfast. Again, a key thing is actually being off our phones when we eat as well. So that can really help with encouraging that recovery and that recovery response. So as I talked about in terms of the research, we're starting to see that actually it's not just about going to go and do 20 minutes of meditation or yoga, which will have a benefit. Certainly those can be recovery practices and really valuable practices for many people. If we really don't have the time, then there still is a value in practices that could be even less than 5 minutes, not just 5 to 10. Anything that helps to lower your heart rate, lower your breathing rate. We talked about that social connection, so actually connecting with other people. We know even that eating with people, so just sitting down and sharing some food can help lower our heart rate and a breathing rate and increase those positive well-being hormones. We can even do exercise snacks. So there's some really interesting research coming out about even just raising our heart rate from an exercise perspective for 5 minutes. So doing 10, 30 seconds of squats, doing a few push-ups, or even a short walk for 5 minutes, just getting outside, changing our view. So even just changing that kind of focus that we have on the screens, that can be quite activating for us. So getting out and just broadening, literally broadening our visual view can be really helpful as well. That can help to regulate us. So even just looking at nature out of the window, we know can have a benefit. I thought it might be useful just very quickly to show you some real life examples of recovery moments that we've seen when people are wearing heart monitors, just so that you can see and start to think about what might be some recovery moments that are happening for you already that you could use more of. So they will be happening for you, I promise, even if it feels like sometimes they're not. This is somebody who was playing the piano. So where you see the red ring, that's just circling a part of somebody's day at the end of the day that they were playing the piano. So that's a focused task, a hobby. It's distracting. They're enjoying it. They're appreciating the music. And you can see where that green is afterwards, that had a really beneficial impact on that person's sleep. That second red circle that's just come up, that was the next morning, and that person was doing a short breathing practice at work. So they were running an experiment to see what happened, and actually they were getting that green recovery moment from that short breathing practice. Again, this was somebody that was doing a hobby, if you can call cooking a hobby. It's certainly one of my hobbies, love food. So this person was cooking, and to add to the experience, they were also singing to their favorite 80s music station, getting some fabulous recovery from that. And they were even having a bit of a kitchen disco while they were washing up. And that was, again, giving them a brilliant recovery moment. So not necessarily complicated things. It could be something like, for this person, just having a cup of tea. Having a cup of tea every day at the same time, 11 o'clock, that's a recovery moment for them. I was working with one client, and the only recovery moment I saw during the day for them was when they were actually looking at funny cat videos on Instagram that had been sent to them by their daughter. So even watching something funny, even if it's a cat video, might even just give you a moment of recovery. This was somebody who was taking time out to eat and putting their child to bed. This is one of my favorites. This is the power of laughter and the power of fun and the power of connection. This person went to a comedy show with family members, was literally crying with laughter, and then shared food with family members afterwards. So what makes you laugh? Just watching things that make you laugh has a benefit to your health and well-being. Could that be one of your recovery practices? Could you do more of that? Again, this was somebody in that first recovery moment that reported feeling really supported by a loved one. So you can see that recovery. And then the second recovery moment highlighted is when they were spending some time in their garden. So just spending some time in nature. So again, the recovery activities, they help us to detach, they help us to relax. Hobbies are a fantastic thing to do. So that could be your crosswords, that could be your reading, it could be anything that you enjoy. You don't even have to go outside or somewhere else to do hobbies. And also things that you choose. So things that you actively choose and you know you enjoy. As I said, just to remake that point, we know in terms of looking at people's heart monitoring data that if you really need to recharge, avoiding alcohol will help. So when we do have alcohol, when we consume alcohol, what we see is that actually is activating for the nervous system. So it activates that sympathetic side of the nervous system because the body has to get rid of the alcohol. So not saying never have a drink with your friends, but if you know that it's been a really hard couple of weeks and you really need that recovery, then maybe that can help you just make a choice. So we have got some resources that we will be sharing with you. We're going to be sharing something afterwards called the Resilience Matrix. It helps look at 6 different evidence-based areas that we know help to prevent burnout and support resilience. So we will send that to you. It's a questionnaire. You can complete it and you can start to get a sense of what might be an area for you to focus on that might be really beneficial for your resilience and your well-being. So it's a very easy to use questionnaire and it will give you some insights that you can apply straight away. But also it will give you some insights on the things that are really working well for you, because that's as important. And remembering, as I said, the things that work really well for you. So within that matrix, you'll also see something called your Resilience Resource Toolkit, and you can take some time to complete that. I invite you to keep coming back to it. Feel free to share it with people or complete it with people, but just starting to note down where are the places that support your resilience and well-being, or the places that feel good. Are there objects that you have? So I've got a little hair on my desktop from my dad, and it's something that just reminds me of my dad. So what are your objects? Who are your people? So Brene Brown talks about our marble jar people as being people who've earned the right to see our vulnerability and have our trust. Very special people. And every time they do something that earns our trust, we put a marble in the jar. So who are your marble jar people? Who are the organizations that you belong to, and what are the activities that you enjoy and that top you up? Because actually spending time thinking about these sorts of things can be really valuable. So I really invite you to start to think about that. And to finish, I just invite you to start to think about what's one thing that you're taking away from today. So what's one thing that you could do more of next week? What's something that's landed with you? What's something that's resonated with you? And if you feel free to share that in the chat box, because that can be really great for all of us to see. It might inspire other people. So what might be something that you're taking away from the session today? What's something that you could remind yourself of? And that's it from me, apart from to say thank you very much. And I'm just going to finish on one of my favorite quotes when I talk about these things, because I really believe that whenever we do something to look after ourselves, there's a benefit to the people that we care about and the things that we care about. We know even in terms of the research that when we do something like we decide to go and ask our neighbour if they want to join us for a walk, there's a benefit for us and there's a benefit for them. So everything we do is going to have a benefit potentially for other people when we do something to support our resilience and our well-being. So thank you so much for your time and your attention. And I think, have we got time to go for a few quick questions in the Q&A session? Are we okay to do that?
Yeah, I think so. We're supposed to finish at 8, I think. So we've
Yeah.
got some time. I think the team have been collating some questions.
Great. I'm already seeing some of the feedback from people. They're going to be kinder than themselves. Do a bit of putting your hand on your chest, thinking about your inner voice, some self-compassion, some breathing exercises, some gratitude. Fab, fab, fab.
I'm just
This is
checking
what gives
how I see those questions now.
how you see the questions.
Yeah.
Getting a routine, absolutely fabulous. Even if it's when you have your cup of tea or your coffee, the importance of micro breaks, fabulous.
Oh, here we go.
Great.
They're just arriving, landing with me now. 1 second. Okay, and I'll get these up.
Absolutely. Somebody said the power is in the doing, and it's true. What I'd say is starting small. So we know that starting small is such a good idea. And if people want to read any more about that, there's a really good book by a neuroscientist called BJ Fogg, and he literally talks about breaking it down into really small steps. So what we're working with is the reward system in the brain. So every time we take that small step, like putting our trainers by the door, then putting our trainers on the next day, then putting our trainers on and taking a step outside the front door, we're working with the reward system in the brain. So the book title is called Micro Habits, and the author is BJ Fogg, Fogg. So I'll write that. Micro Habits.
So we have
Let's
another
see.
question from the chat, and it came in earlier. And the question is the problem with modern day stressors just that they build up and stick around? They're not like ancient stressors that were quite short-lived, a short-lived threat. They're kind of all the time. So our cortisol response never shuts off these days, whereas ancient people would have had quite brief periods of activation and then been able to recover. What are your thoughts on that, Kate?
I think it's a really valid point. I think there's a lot of things that's also grabbing our attention a lot. So even just from the simple fact of one of the things we noticed in people's data is when they sit down and watch a movie but without their phone, the difference, and sharing that with somebody, the difference that that has on their physiology, as in they get recovery, compared to sitting down in front of the TV, watching the TV, but also being on our phone. And what that did was that actually didn't create a recovery moment. So I think it's partly to do with the stresses, possibly partly to do with the distraction as well, is that we're just more activated, and agreed, we have less time potentially as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why your focus on your kind of micro moments to just pause and break that stress cycle are really important practices to build into your life. And one of the things we've often talked about, you and I, is practice these things when you don't need them. So that when the stress really kicks in, you're already practiced at them. Don't wait until that moment when you really need the practice to practice. So build up the habit, and then that can link into the book on small, simple solutions that you practice over and over again, so they become built in. Next question is, what's the ideal approach? Is it preventive or reactive? Would we learn both here, or either? Which way would you go, Kate? Preventive or reactive? I think I probably know the answer.
Well, I mean, I would do both. I know that there's a model that Justin's developed, which is really useful, which is looking about how we prepare. So that's that proactive, how we adapt and how we recover. Is that right, Justin? Are those
Yeah,
the three?
we're just about to start some research on that actually with first year students next year. specifically around assessment. So how we prepare for an assessment, how we adapt when things maybe go wrong, and how we recover after
Yeah.
you put your assessment in and maybe you get feedback. We're playing with one other addition, Kate. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but we're playing with one other addition, and it's tolerate. So sometimes there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
But how do you just sit with it? And unfortunately, the language isn't landing. So, but it is an idea of, tolerate the uncertainty. You talked about uncertainty earlier,
Yeah.
and sometimes there is nothing you can do about it. So how do you sit with that and tolerate that? But yeah, so those elements
Yeah.
are
I call that
important
accept
ones.
it but not like it. Yeah.
Yeah,
How can I
exactly. That's a
accept it
nice.
but not like it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
There's that's a thing sometimes. And it's a practice. And I think, to go back to that excellent question, it's nuanced. I think the ideal is that we have that opportunity to reflect and be aware, so that we can understand when we need to be proactive or be proactive where possible. And that's certainly what it suggests in terms of the research around elite performance, is that preparation is what helps, so that you can also implement it when you need to react as well. But I think for the purposes of all of this, it's just useful to have that understanding of all three are useful. It's not a binary thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think even in elite performance, in elite sports performance now, there's a lot of work going on into really high quality recovery. And that's been shown to have a huge impact on preventing injuries and things like that. I mean, on a physical level, but also on a, if you've made a mistake, if you've, I don't know,
Yeah.
missed a shot or something like that, how quickly you can recover and how well you can recover helps you with the next thing.
We definitely saw some of that with the Lionesses and a penalty taking, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That twice that she's won it with the last kick of the ball. Well done.
Mm.
Well done, the Lionesses.
Mm.
Next question is, can we? Oh yeah, here we go. Can our innate weakness strength? This feels like a PhD question, Kate. Here,
Okay,
we may
hit
not
me.
get through this one, but here we go. So if whoever put this in, I wanted to put in the chat. Have you ever thought about doing a PhD? This could be your question. Can our innate weakness strength contribute significantly to how we avoid burnouts?
It's a really good question. Wow. I mean, there is some research that suggests, and I mean, I guess I struggle with the word weakness a little bit.
Mm,
It's maybe I would present it differently. There are many things that might impact and influence us. Again, that might be beyond our control, but that might give us an increased vulnerability to things like burnout, for sure.
yeah.
And I think that they see that with certainly armed forces, like members of the armed forces. It's possible that experiences that we may have had from way back that were beyond our control, for example, could have an impact. What I think is super positive or really important is also that none of that is necessarily insurmountable either. So, for example, they've identified that certain people might be more sensitive to developing things like PTSD, certainly in things like the armed forces. But actually, interventions like self-compassion, for example, can really have a significant impact on things like PTSD. And I think that one of the things that can be so difficult for all of us as human beings, but yet ironically connects every single person, is feeling shame. So if we start to loosen that relationship, which is really hard, but know that we're not alone, for example, when we experience really difficult emotions, it's something that connects everybody.
Yeah. I know when we first started at the centre and we were looking at how we assess this, one of the things we did look into is genetics and whether or not we should be assessing, because there are certain genes like the COMT gene, which were beginning to show perhaps if someone had that gene expressed, then maybe, but we didn't go down that route really, because you can't change that. So if you were born in the Himalayas, you've probably got a better resiliency for living at high altitude than if you weren't. So
Yeah.
sometimes your physiology is designed for your certain situation or certain circumstance. But it really is a nuanced question. It's a really important question, and even within that, how do you boost your kind of bounce back ability, or your ability to buffer against
yeah. And just
burnout, because there will be ways.
Yeah, I mean, just to share, like I was a premature baby and I had lots of interventions, and I know that's probably made my amygdala much more sensitive, plus maybe even a bit of neurodiversity. So I know that that's my nervous system. And so it took me a very long time to understand, to work with my nervous system and work with
Yeah.
myself rather than against. And that is what kind of shifted some of these things for me, as well as obviously being able to be in the center and just spend a lot of time thinking about these things and attempting to practice them, because I'm not perfect at practice either.
And one more thing on that, when we worked, Kate and I worked in the NHS for a long time together. And in the NHS, not to say burnout isn't an individual thing, but in the NHS, burnout is not an individual thing. Generally, it's an organizational bit.
Yeah.
So it's not the individual that's really the kind of issue, if you like. It's the organizational lack of resources, overwork, overburden, overcommitment, all
Yeah.
of those elements. And that's one thing to, and you do get burnout at individual levels. For example, entrepreneurs that are often quite solo workers will have high levels of burnout. So you can get that. And Kate's
Yeah.
been coaching some
And
of our entrepreneurial
charity work.
students
Yeah.
and charity workers, but quite often it's also an organizational issue. And unfortunately, the organizations often try and teach individual solutions and not deal with the organizational level of burnout, which can be
It's
problematic.
true. And I do agree completely, Justin. And it's something that's really important to be named. And I still go into organizations because I still think and believe we might not be able to change the culture of the organization, but if there's anything that we can take from this that supports ourselves, then maybe that could be of value, or it might even be that it's of value to somebody else.
Yeah.
So my mission isn't to pretend that there aren't these things happening, but still to see if there's like a micro moment of something for somebody that might be able to be useful.
Yeah, and if you work with people in the organizations, they can make quite significant changes in small teams and locally, and even policy wise as well.
Absolutely.
So another question, this might be one of our last ones, I think. How do you measure recovery for these charts? What are the markers, given that heart rate can still be up, and in this case, exercise, etc. So Kate will be able to answer this.
Yeah. So the devices that you saw, the data from was actually, it's a heart rate variability monitoring device. So what it's looking at is heart rate, but it's also looking at heart rate variability. So where we see an increase in heart rate variability, what that suggests physiologically, tends to suggest physiologically, is that people are in recovery. And when heart rate is lower, what that tends to suggest is that people are activated. It's true that if you were doing exercise, your heart rate variability would likely be lower because you're exercising. So that's where this kind of concept of stress can be really useful, or activation, because stress isn't always bad, and it doesn't always mean that we're emotionally stressed. Stress is just activation, and that's going to be using our physiological resources, whether that's stress because it's emotional stress, or whether it's stress because we are just busy and getting stuff done, that drive. So yeah, I don't know if that clarifies it a bit.
Yeah, and a long term, it's quite a tricky one to measure, but cortisol is quite a good measure of how well someone recovers a daily cortisol slate. But it's quite at the moment, it was probably the hardest measure that we ever had to get people to do because you're not supposed to drink while you're on it. And trying to get chief execs and stuff to have a day of socializing was quite tricky. So it was quite a problem. However, that can be quite a useful measure, and that might lead into an interesting backup question, Kate, which is how can someone recognize the early signs of burnout before it becomes severe?
Mm.
Any comments on
So
that?
they, yeah, I mean, they say that there are sort of like three key things, which is the kind of depersonalization. So feeling almost like you're not connected or not attached or kind of just numb to things. I don't know if that's um, and then just a very kind of prolonged deep fatigue,
Yeah.
I would say. And I think this is the thing that when I was looking at some of the research this morning, it was saying that potentially quite a number of people are experiencing 2 out of 3 of the 3 key signs of burnout at times. So that's that sort of cynicism or depersonalization, just that sense of not being able to get stuff done. Sometimes it feels, I always imagine it almost feeling like you're walking through mud, and that kind of emotional exhaustion or just deep fatigue, emotional exhaustion. And absolutely, as Justin put, the Maslow burnout inventory can be really useful too.
Yeah, when we worked at one of the organizations, one of our tasks was to help leaders within that organization this was before the days of things like the mental health first aid was really prevalent, and one of our tasks was to train leaders, managers and leaders in an organization to identify and spot signs of um, mental health issues and burnout and stress that wasn't helpful. So we taught them some of the kind of signs that they could spot, and then we also linked them into an employee assistance program. This links into one of the other questions around, what can organizations do? And it's really around changing the kind of culture in the organization. I think that's a kind of key piece. And what we were trying to do there is, or what they were trying to do, what we were trying to help them with is really change the culture in the organization, because you've all probably heard that saying, you can have the best strategy in the world, but culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah,
So if you have a good strategy and a poor culture, that doesn't work. You can
yeah.
have a poor strategy and quite a good culture, and that's probably more useful.
And I think, some of the work that we did, so with some of the clients that we did with some of the clients like Microsoft, is really getting an understanding of, so we use the model, like, what are the drivers, what are the drainers within the organization, and got people to really sort of work around what that was at different levels. And sometimes people at, let's say, the top weren't as aware of some of the things that were happening kind of lower down that were draining people. One of the things that I'm also remembering is a team that I worked with recently. And again, I got them to kind of complete the drivers and drainers. And what the team was saying was that they really needed more self-compassion. So they had a fabulous, fabulous team leader. He was incredibly self-compassionate. So it was such a blind spot for him that other people might be struggling with self-compassion. And it really took some data and kind of presenting it to him. We did something called a dotmocracy. So it's quite anonymous, and everybody sticks the green dot on something that they think is like really important for the team. And that gave the visual evidence of actually this is something that's really important. So again, that was helping to shift the culture. But because and it was an absolutely fabulous leader, but they very much excelled in something that supported their resilience, which everybody else in the team didn't. So it was just a blind spot, really.
Oh, that's great. That's all we've got time for. So I'm going to wrap up now. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Kate. It's always a pleasure to do anything with you, Kate. And I think great for our alumni to get some real world insight of the work you're doing with healthcare, with organizations, with teams, with communities. You're really taking the data and the science, and what I sometimes call it's data driven and human delivered. Really, really powerful. So thank you so much, Kate, for your insights and advice tonight. Please, if you've enjoyed this, and even if you haven't enjoyed this, do complete the short evaluation survey, which is in the general chat. should be there now. We're always looking to make these things, these events better and meet your needs and meet the, what would serve you as our community well. So please please do fill it in. I always say feedback sometimes might be a bit like remember your mum used to give you cod liver oil. It doesn't taste too good, but it's supposed to be good for you. So give us good feedback that helps us to kind of do more things that are useful for you guys. That would be really helpful. We'll email
Definitely.
you the link to the YouTube recording very soon. And yeah, thank you, Kate, and thank you, James and David and the team for looking after the moderation and the questions. Really appreciate it and organising everything. And thank you to all of you guys for being so active and participating in the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having